right. Welcome back, everyone, to Connor Prairie's newest one and only podcast, Beyond the Revolution. I'm Easton.
And I'm Ryan.
And we're happy to have y'all back with us as we take another dive through some America 250 related history. So, how's everybody feeling?
Good. We have a great guest. Very excited to have her on the podcast today. We were joined by a curator at the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, Michelle Banks.
Woo! Hello, everyone.
And now the Folklife Center, or the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, it's part cultural center, it's part record label, it's part festival. How do you describe what the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage at the Smithsonian is?
Get it all out of the way first of all. So I guess the most important thing is when people hear the Smithsonian, they think about museums. The Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage is not a museum. So we are a research unit of the Smithsonian, and our mission is to connect communities across culture, and we use that, and we do that through research, and that's research that is grounded in community, and that research shapes the different programs that emerge from our center. So Ryan, you mentioned the record label. So we have Folkways Records, which is a nonprofit record label that documents and gathers some of the world's musical and spoken word heritage. We have the Ralph Renzler Archive, which is a collection of films and videos and photographs and sound recordings and field reports that document cultural traditions from around the world. We do a cultural sustainability, cultural vitality work. And this is work that we're doing to work with communities to support sustainability efforts that include everything from local artists and cultural traditions and language and crafts and other life ways. And finally, is the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, and that's where my particular role comes in. I'm a curator with the Folklife Festival, and the festival has been around since 1967, and it's an opportunity to celebrate the work of and honor and celebrate the work of culture and tradition bearers from across the country and around the world. And we can talk a little bit more about what that means in a few minutes.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Across the country and around the world. Got a wide reach there.
That's right. At this point, we have done festival programming that represents every state in the United States, and probably about 100, probably a little over 100 countries.
Wow, that's more people than this podcast reaches. Like by a pretty wide margin too.
Well, then, Ms. Banks, I'll ask you this. So as a curator, what are your responsibilities like there?
So it's not a lot different. I mean, it's very similar as a curator in a museum. I think the difference is that oftentimes museums, not all the time, so I don't want to be too general about this, but oftentimes museums are dealing with things that people produce without again, a lot of this might be things that, where the maker has passed away, or historical documents and that sort of thing. The thing about the festival is about living tradition. So as a curator, my role is to work with communities. So let's say there's a theme of a festival. So the first festival, and I'll talk through this based on my first experience as a curator, which was in 2023. I was part of a team that curated a program called Creative Encounters, Living Religions in the United States. And this was a program that looked at and explored the creativity that emerged from people's religious and spiritual experiences. So people who carve saints and paint religious icons, and Sikh kirtan musicians, or Islamic recitation and that sort of thing. So part of my role as curator was to sort of, you take this big theme. Well, first of all, the big question is, the religious and spiritual experiences of people across the United States. That's huge. How do you even begin to approach that? So,
right.
So part of my role was to sort of create a thematic framework to sort of make, so to be able to invite many different voices in, but at the same time, recognizing that this was only a small fraction of what the possibilities were. So the program ended up being organized around four different themes: makers of faith, which explored like the things that the physical objects that people make, for example, painting religious icons or ceremonial masks and that sort of thing. Sound religion, of course, being music that emerges from tradition, gospel music, kirtan music, but also poetry. We did a mushaira, which is a very in the Islamic world is a very long poetry gathering. That becomes a form of sound expression. Futurisms looked at sort of thinking about how people are looking, how religious institutions are embracing different faith traditions or working together across cultural lines. There was a theme that focused on dance and movement as a spiritual practice and that sort of thing. So my job was to be able to sort of put those things into perspective, but also in this case, because and rather than bringing objects to a music to which is what museums often do, is that we're bringing people to Washington D.C. to the National Mall, and those people are then demonstrating and sharing the work that they do. So I realized I didn't say this a little earlier, but the festival happens in Washington, D.C. on the National Mall. So that area between the Capitol and the Monument, that huge boulevard in the middle of the city. And we, in essence, we sort of construct a village, and that village includes performance stages where dance and music presentations take place. It includes oftentimes includes a demonstration area where people will be set up in tents or other structures where they'll actually be making the different materials. So in this case, we had a person from Tucson. He was Yoeme, more commonly known as Yaki, and he was a carver of Coscola mask, which is a really important ceremonial mask in Ueme tradition. So he had an area where he had wood set up, and he had some examples of the work that he'd done in the past. And during the course of the day, he was carving different masks. People could come up and ask questions. So it's very informal.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, where while he's doing this, there's a music stage over someplace else, and there's music. Every 45 minutes, there are people, different artists who are performing different musical genres. On another side of the festival area, might be a smaller stage where people are coming together to talk about the work that they do, and that's the important difference between the festival and the museum. There's a former undersecretary of the Smithsonian who talked about the museum being a noun and the festival being a verb. We create an opportunity for people to actually, the makers, the people who do this work, to actually tell their stories and talk about their lineage. So my job as curator is to once I've created this framework, is to go out into, I go to their studios, or I go to their schools, or I go to their communities or their villages or wherever, to work with these people to sort of think about what's the story that you want to tell. So a lot of our work as curators is doing just that, being out in community, and that question of the story that you want to tell. How would you present this work to a national audience? That becomes very much the center of my role as a curator, sort of creating that framework and then working with the artists that we will bring to Washington, D.C. to figure out how we'll present their work.
That's incredible.
That's amazing. That sounds like something I'd love to go to.
Yes.
Well, you
And
got to make some time.
I do. Get some travel budget. on
That's
the
right.
side.
And this is why you're the perfect person for this conversation. We're going to be talking about storytelling. We're going to be talking about language and how the stories that we tell now are really for the future. It's what we want the future to remember about us, about the past. But I do want to ask a question before I forget. So my first internship was 10 years ago at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival. That's where I sort of learned how to interview people on the fly out at the festival. I worked on the video team, and there I was always actually. Before I get to that internship really prepared me for what we do here at Conner Prairie, because it's so active of a museum, Conner Prairie. We have so many people out on the grounds talking with people, doing traditional craft. But what's different about us is it's a very closed loop. We create that sense of community from a representative idea of the past. But with the Folklife Festival, like these obviously are real people. These are the crafts that they do every day. And my question for you, because that's the difference between the Folklife Festival here in Conner Prairie, is how do you go about identifying these people, these communities, to bring to the festival? I imagine it takes a lot of research and a lot of just going around and seeing who knows who kind of work.
Yeah, so it's all of that. We do work with state arts councils. We do work with a state folklorist. We do work with teachers. We do work with community members. So it varies. It depends on what it is that we're working with. In 2025, I did a program called Youth in the Future of Culture, and it was focused on how young people are maintaining cultural traditions and how they innovate tradition, and how very much they are involved in creating the cultural landscape. And that was a program where we relied a lot, not necessarily more than any others, but we relied some on programs that were catering to young people. Programs. We worked with in the San Fernando Valley of California. Naticano was a very famous uh, a mariachi musician who had worked with the festival over a number of many years and had recorded with Folkways Records. And 20 years ago, he started a mariachi apprenticeship program. And he brought together, was supposed to, I think my understanding is that the program was supposed to last for a year, and 20 years later, they're still going strong. And the musicians, Donati has passed away some years ago, but the musicians in his group have maintained that program. So with the youth program, for example, there are hundreds of programs around the country that are teaching young people in community and schools and about music and dance and other sorts of things. So it really depends on the program. If we're working with a particular state, sometimes the first folks we talk to are people in the state arts council or the humanities council, and they say, you have to, if you do this program, you have to have this person come. If we are working with a country program, the minister of culture, or other community members. So it varies, but we work closely with colleagues. We often work with museums as well, because even though museums are different, there's elements of the museum that are very different from the festival. Museums also, but they also have a pulse on what's happening in communities. So when they do public programming, they know who the artists are that are doing this work, for example. So yeah, we make these other contacts with colleagues that but run across the board, and sometimes they're just our personal contacts as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that too, because like it shows how important the work being done on the local level is, even for things like the Smithsonian. Like without that work on the local level, the Smithsonian Folklife Festival couldn't do what it does. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I love the way you said that. I'm going to use that.
So you are joining us kind of on a more larger scale thing. Smithsonian is doing this project in for America 250 called Making History, Making Change. And again, talking about taking the Smithsonian and kind of dispersing it amongst the the whole country. Making History, Making Change is a national effort where Smithsonian brings curators to local museums, local communities, to share some of the expertise that the Smithsonian has. We were lucky enough to have Michelle Banks come a couple weeks ago for our Blackbirders Week, and she was actually the keynote speaker, looking at the Black traditions of nature poetry or eco-poetic traditions. And similarly, this episode that we're talking about with Michelle Banks is going to pair with an episode we're going to do with the Indiana Historical Society. They also had a Making History, Making Change speaker, but they're focused more on how past language influences the future and how all of this language that you find in the founding documents, the ideas of all created equal, we the people, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, how that, while it was truly aspirational, and it took a long time for us to, actually live up to those sort of aspirations. And so we're pairing this with this one where we're talking about the things that are important to us today, what we can do, what storytelling can do, and how that lives on into the future. Yes. So the first thing to sort of jump us into this is exploring the different ways language is carried into the future beyond legal documents, because language outlives all of us. And something that we're kind of basing this episode on is this idea of future language. How the language that we use now, if you think about it in the same sense as like the founders used all this aspirational language to, in theory, inspire future generations. What is the language that we're using now that we hope inspires generations to come? We're at a very interesting point in time, being America 250th. It's an opportunity to sort of look ahead and see what we can do now to prepare that. I know that's not much of a question, but
Okay, I'll try. We'll see. So I think I want to start. I'm just going to throw this out there because it was something that I just saw maybe an hour or so ago. The New York Times this morning is talking about language, and one of the things, the opening sentence in on the newsletter was something like the United States was written into being 250 years ago. So I thought that was like, okay, I'm getting ready to go into this conversation. So I'm throwing that out there. We can tuck it away. Maybe we'll come back to it. But so I have a colleague who we work with some at the Smithsonian, at the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. He's a storyteller out of Baltimore. David Fakule. And David talks about that. One of the things that David always says is that everything we do is storytelling. And so if we're thinking of future language, I would say that if I'm reading your question the right way, or your lack of question, as you mentioned, is that the things that we carry, the things that we share on a daily basis, the music that we're producing, the poetry that we're producing, that is that future language. These are the things, that, and it's interesting. So yeah, that connection with the festival is very much there. Our job is, as a festival, our job is to create a space for cultural democracy, and which of course is this idea that people in communities get to decide who, how the story of this community is told, what is culture and what counts as culture, what counts as traditions that are important. So I would say that the music in our archive is that future language. The poetry in our archive is that future language. The images in our archive are that future language. One of the things I talked about in the keynote last week was sort of I can get kind of liberal when it comes to language. So I encourage people to think of images also being a language. And one of the reasons for that is, sort of based on, sort of scientific fact, or, so to speak, is that, there's been some evidence that we process images differently because they draw on areas of the brain that are evolutionary older than the the parts of the brain that produce language itself. So what we see and what we sort of create and bring into the world, be that a painting, be that some sort of a basket that tells a story. If there's a story, and I think what I'm trying to say is if there's a story involved in it, whether or not that story is told or shared in that moment, there's a language that piece produces, and I think that those are the things that begin to carry us forward. So our work at the center is important in part because we create an opportunity for people to verbalize and to begin and to sort of create the language, not create the language, but share the language, quote unquote, or slash share the story that is embedded in that work that they do. I hope there's something in there.
Yeah. I actually, at the very beginning of that, of your remarks there, I love the idea of the community has a choice, right? All of these things that we're talking about, you often think of history as this sort of objective thing that happened, but the traditions in which we carry on are active choices with each generation, and we have an active choice now to decide what traditions we want to keep going, what stories we want to tell about ourselves, the stories we want to tell about the past, so that the future, either learns a lesson, is inspired by, wants to, we may tell a story that evokes change. Like, we want the future to change it, and that's what's really interesting to me, and how storytelling does, like, inherently telling stories about the past are for the future, which is I've only recently started thinking about history that way, and thinking about being very purposeful in what stories we tell. And as a curator, that's where that comes in, is those choices too, of on more of a museum side when it's a static display, but even when, like, you're going in and identifying, you have to not necessarily curate the people, but identify people that might represent a community, or represent whatever language this is: music, dance, poetry. To then preserve that for the future, which is really interesting.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's important. So, given that that it is important that I guess the word democratize becomes really important in this discussion, because what is that? What is that? Dicho saying about who gets to write history?
Right.
So it's really important that the not and when I, again, being very liberal, the writing of the history, that there's spaces, that there's spaces for all different sorts of voices of people to, to be able to be part of that. So community members being able to say that this is what we do, this is important, and it deserves to be seen at the festival, and that that becomes a really important, that democratization of the space, of that discourse, of that dialogue between who gets to tell the story.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to your point too, especially with creation, right? To make sure that this is democratized, that everyone is, actively creating things. And a lot of people don't think they have the right words to say. But again, it's more than just words. It's anything that you can create. And something that I actually really appreciated when you came and visited us just last week, you did a couple of poetry workshops. And now I don't see myself as a poet. I rarely see myself as an artist, even though I do film, and that is a very creative medium. But just what we did in that workshop and sort of explored poetry, I hadn't explored that in a long time. And it actually, like, I felt very different about expressing something through poetry. And I know Easton also was a part of that workshop and has his poem here.
I did. I do. I brought it.
Yay!
And because I know I didn't share it that day, but I actually did a "Where I'm From" type poem back in third grade. So it was interesting to see how, like, my third grade one changed from the one that I did with you the other day. So I do intend to share it, but I know Ryan has a question for you.
Oh, no.
So, is this my turn? Okay, great.
I think it's time for poetry. Yes.
It's time for poetry.
I used to be very good at poetry. Although I don't know if good at poetry is really a thing. It's more about like just putting your emotions down on paper. So here we go. So this was like the prompt was essentially Miss Banks gave us this prompt of basically saying like describe where you're from, like the feelings as well as the actual physical location.
Taste. Yeah.
Absolutely. So here we go. I am from safety, cookies, hot air balloons, and painted wood. Sun, Lennon, family that... What did I write? Oh, hang on. Family that becomes friends. Friends that become family. Leaves that slid right off of the waxed car. Views of the lake. Breakfast for dinner, especially on Sundays. Fields on fields. Church across the road. Born into the congregation. And nigh endless summers. That was it.
We snap. We snap.
That's beautiful. And
Well, thank you.
So yeah, thinking about that, it's funny that even last week, every time I do that activity, I'm amazed at how there was some folks in the workshop. There was the family from California. There was some people from there was a woman from the DC metro area. There are a lot of folks from Indiana. So it was kind of a diverse group in terms of where people were coming from. But every poem that people shared, there was like one thing in that poem that resonated.
Mhm.
And even though we come from these very different places, and I think that's sort of the beauty of this is sort of that finding those things, finding those threads, where those through lines. And sometimes they take some coaxing out, and sometimes they're just right there. And when we share that stuff, and when we sort of bring that language into being, and and open it up and verbalize it and like shout it out, that's where you find those when you find those stories and you find those connections. And that's the beauty of this stuff, is like finding those connections. And yeah, finding those connections. I want to go back to something you said, Ryan, too, is that this is sort of about sort of that process of creation. I come from I have a theater background for many years ago in the 1980s. Yeah, whatever. Anyway, yes, many years ago. It is what it is. Many years ago, in the 1980s, I did a lot of theater work, popular and participatory theater. And from that, we were working with young people in schools, and we were working with young people who had been incarcerated, and working with young people who were runaways, and that's when we're creating spaces for them to tell their stories. And working with other theater companies in the area, but also internationally, that were also doing very similar work. And one of the things that I learned as an artist and learned as a person who creates is that process of creation is important labor. And that our creativity also has to, in the same way that we have to feed ourselves with food, our creativity also has to be fed. So thank you, Easton, for sharing that, and thank you for saying that, because that was that's sort of the important piece of this, is that when we talk about this, going back to this idea of creation or who's telling the story, part of that is being able to create a space for people to feel like they can tell that story, to
Right.
share that story. And then whether that's through the standard Where I'm From poem, I feel like everybody has done a Where I'm From poem at this point, but I think it's a great model for a poem because anybody can do it and come out of that. And some people come at it with incredibly beautiful images. It's not like roses are red, violets are blue. People are coming out with really, really powerful images and powerful stories. So when you create a space for people to be able to share that, that's that important work that we do.
Yes, and something, I mean, on the podcast, we end up talking about like where we're from. Easton's from Cincinnati, brings it up all the time because it is very important to who he is as a person. And I did really like doing this because it was so much different. This past semester, I did a youth program called Democracy and Dialogue with the Smithsonian, and we talked about community and we talked about all of these things. And then it was with a group of 11 to 18-year-olds, and we got to having to write like biographies, and they all just immediately went to, I'm X amount of years old. I'm in this grade. This is my favorite hobby. And I was like, okay, let's try something else because, that is all important. Let's try and like figure out the ways you are like going through the world and how other people see you. And so what we had is by the end of it, they kind of knew each other enough. We spent so much time together that we had them pair up and they wrote each other's biographies, and it was so much different. It was like this person's kind, this person's, and like something that they wouldn't necessarily write about themselves, but it was still like an accurate reflection. And so I appreciate this poetry activity because you kind of condense that sort of humility it takes to like say some personal stuff about yourself and what that means for where you are now. And then it was really easy to connect with people because, I lived in the DC metro area for a couple years, and I, can recognize some of those things. And it is this sort of room for vulnerability that like it was pretty incredible to sort of just happen that quickly with a group that didn't really know each other. Even with like Easton and me, we've been on the podcast for a couple of years now, but getting just a different level of vulnerability there.
Yeah. Being vulnerable, that's kind of the key there. And creating, so again, sort of creating a space for that vulnerability. So you hear that poem creates a framework that anybody can, what does home smell like? For me, it's, to this day, I have met church. Part of church for me, Easton, was after church when my Aunt Bertha and like some of the other ladies, they always had chiclets in their purses, and they all smelled like they all smelled like peppermint and lifesavers and that sort of thing. So those smells of, my grandmother smelling like peppermint from the chick, the peppermint candies and chiclets that she kept in her purse. I'll share that poem, and the number of people that are nodding in the audience is just like, oh, okay, if she can share that, I can share this memory of the smell of liniment on, or Vicks Vapor Rub. Because again, you find out that these are the things, and you also too, I think you find out that these are the things of poetry. Going back to this idea of language, one of the themes that I sort of talk about in the keynote at Prairie is sort of like expanding the archive, expanding the parameters of what these things look like. So my grandmother, who smelled like peppermint, to me is poetry. And to be able to share that in a poem, and somebody else saying, oh, okay, so then, me listening to the Doves, I'm realizing that this is poetry. So you're expanding the parameters of what it looks like. It doesn't have to be a Shakespearean sonnet.
Right.
This is all of these things are poetry.
Oh yeah. Yeah, just I agree. And just as you were saying, like I was sitting there like, "Oh my gosh, my grandma used to have Altoids." And that reminded, like, I don't think I've talked about Altoids in years, but here I am talking about Altoids. I mean,
Yeah. And you can smell it. You remember that smell. Yeah.
it is crazy, especially with smell, just how like memories just come flooding back. It is yeah. But I also have to agree with the vulnerability piece too. I mean, even this, like, I used to do poetry quite a lot, and yet sharing this was very like, it was very very vulnerable experience, and yeah, it's but yeah, really cool too, that commonality that kind of comes out when you share those experiences with other people.
Yeah, you just get a better understanding for everyone. If everyone's in that state where they are able to be vulnerable with each other. Um, the other thing that I got out of that I think relates to this broader conversation is poetry as kind of an interesting metaphor for exploring like what it means with when we talk about like future language in America 250, because it's all about playing with form and structure, and whether you learn the forms and the structure, you learn the Shakespeare sonnet, but you don't necessarily have to do it. You can break from it. You can choose. That's where the fun comes in. You can choose what traditions that you want to follow, what traditions you think should be, or you can play with it and make it more your own. And poetry is an interesting sort of metaphor for how we can look at what are we, inspired by our past that we want to continue, or what structures and forms do we want to break away from.
Yeah. And also, you're recognizing that language is always evolving. There's language that doth, and those are you don't hear that all the time anymore. With the keynote the other day, I was looking this idea of behold. Instead of thinking about, yeah, that's dated. Does it? When was that? I don't think I've never used behold in a sentence. But at that moment, recognizing that was the word that captured, for me, that behold the land, when you think about the power of the land, I felt like, behold is like, isn't, is really apropos for this. But language is always evolving, and thinking about how we um, um, that evolution, as you were saying, Ryan, that evolution allows us to sort of um, uh, expand the archive. This is, this is what is we're doing an initiative as part of the 2020 TIX Festival, the sojourning that we're doing with communities about, it's called We Hold These Truths. And this is something, it's an interview station that we're popping up at different festivals across the country, where people have an opportunity to tell the truths of their communities. Our community is resilient. Our community is about family. Our community is grounded in music. And these are the things, using um, that line from the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths. So you have this big, wide, what that meant. We hold these truths, but people in every community, those truths are something very different. But those truths are also part of this larger, story that creates this nation. This is a nation of stories, and people's recognition of their own individual truths as community members or as family members are very different than the larger truths of the larger nation.
Yeah, that makes me think of a previous episode. We had Alex Edgar on, and we did our declaration. We had brought in like 100 Gen Z people to Philadelphia, and we basically wrote our own declaration. And we did it, the framework, we used the same framework. And so we hold these truths, and it was honestly hard, even just, 100 Gen Z, because we couldn't agree necessarily on what truths were, representative of us. Because, yeah. And so it's so good to get as many, again, democratization of this, as many answers as possible for that. Also, we've talked a lot about like the vulnerability and humility and the importance of creation as on the half of the creator. But I am also curious your ideas of like, what is it that we gain when we are listening to other people's stories?
Oh, another colleague, Kiran Singh Sira, talks about, also another storyteller, where he talks is, what does he say? The, oh gosh, the
Is this the smallest space between?
the shortest path. Yeah, you know it. Go ahead. I shared
Oh,
it in the workshop with you. The
I know.
shortest distance between people is a story. So again, going back to that poetry workshop, I had folks, the little girl from Indiana, she was about 7 years old. She talks about fishing, and to me, it's like, I remember those fishing stories. So I think that, and this is something, so this is something that there are people who write about, we talk about the storyteller, but we don't often talk about the story listener, the person who hears that story, the person who, and that sounds like sort of, well, why would we talk about them? Because who are our listeners? How do we tell the story? What are the things we hype up in the story or we roll back on when we tell the story? How the story that we tell and what the story we tell, that and the type of story we tell, or the essence of the story we tell, oftentimes changes depending on who it is that we're talking to. And there are people, there are people who talk about, we hear what we need to hear in a particular moment. So if I'm in need of sort of understanding humility, if I'm in need of understanding being vulnerable, if I'm grieving, I will take from a story what I need to take from that story in that moment. And that's always that's a process that's always different, that always moves. And it's changing because as the listener, there's a vulnerability that we want to, as a storyteller, that we that's not necessarily important, but that is part of that. There's a vulnerability of telling our stories, but there's also a similar process, and I don't know that I have the word for it, that happens when we're the story listener, because we're taking from that story something that will carry forth. I'm sort of constantly telling other people's stories too, sort of, even if they're not my own story, I recognize the power in that story, and whether or not I needed something from that story in that moment, I've still heard that story. But in another moment, I may not have a story of my own to share with someone to sort of to sort of get them to where they need to be, or for them to hear what they need to hear. But I have a whole lot of other stories that I've gathered from people and folks that I've worked with that I can share in that moment. So there is a reciprocity between the storyteller and the story listener. And that's a really important reciprocity that's there. The storyteller is telling and sharing in that moment because they also have a need to share, and the story listener is taking that in, and there, I don't want to say rules, but they're important guidelines for the listener too, to be to be present, to hear and to really see and understand, sort of, to be present in that moment too. So I think that reciprocity between the storyteller and the story listener are really important, and that's probably something that we don't necessarily think about as much as we should. If we think about, and I think it's, and again, sort of thinking about language, I think it's the language that we use. If I think about a person being a storyteller, there's a certain openness and freedom that that people are sharing. But at the same time, recognizing storytelling as also being a very intimate thing. Of storytelling is not always performative. So thinking about language and how we define language, and going back to what I was mentioning about my friend David talking about everything that we do is storytelling. So with that, what happens is that it pushes us to sort of think about these things in a much more open sort of way. And I'm hoping to, as a result, recognizing that reciprocity between the storyteller and the person who's listening or sort of taking some of that in.
Yeah. It reminds me here at Prairie, for a long time, we have first person interpreters out on the grounds, and you would think they are the storytellers, right? And then the guests are the ones that are listening to the story. And that's how it was for a very long time. And then we did a lot of evaluative research and realized that that may not be the best way people learn. And we realized very quickly, and we started a program called Opening Doors, that it's better to, find the things that they are interested in. And a lot of times the interpreters end up being those story listeners. They may mention just like, again, something that's in the kitchen and it jogs the memory in our guest. And then they become the storyteller. And it's important for them to have that time to, sort of sort through those connections that they're making with their own life in the past. And they're learning through those things that they are already familiar with through that storytelling. And so coming here, I've had a much different approach to storytelling, and knowing that our guests, are representative of their communities. They are as much a part of this story as what we want to tell them.
Yeah. You're creating a space for everyone to be a part of, to be involved in that process. And that's really important. When you started talking, I said, I know where you're going with this, and I love it.
Yes.
So that makes that makes me really happy that you recognize how important it is for people who are guests to feel like they that their voice matters within this larger picture of this history. So yeah, that's really important.
What it kind of reminds me of too is I've been sitting back thinking, since we've started this podcast, I've been looking at what brands have been actually talking about the 250th anniversary of America. And it's a relatively short list because it's not, we're within the month now. And the only two that I say leaned into the storytelling aspect of America, the American Revolution, are Jeep and Ram, which is interesting. And then on top of Jeep and Ram, I think the only other ones were like Disney, Coca-Cola, and Mountain Dew. They may be the same company. And then the St. Louis Cardinals. And that was it. So but Jeep and Ram have definitely leaned heavier into the whole, this is America's story. Aren't we so cool? And they just kind of made their commercial based off of that, which I find interesting because they seem very, I don't know if pointed is the word, but they seem very, they just seem very directed at, I just think that the reason that they start with storytelling, like they lead with storytelling, definitely makes those advertisements seem way different than the ones that are just like, we're releasing a red, white, and blue soda.
Yeah, and then they slap the America 250 logo on it.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this during this conversation of culture capital and how we really rely on culture, especially in this country, and not often is it appreciated in other terms. Like when we're talking about creation, a lot of people don't feel like they can do poetry because there isn't like a monetary return on it, but there is so much more of a return on the thing that you personally get out of creating a poem or something. And so it is interesting, these brands, only a few brands, keying into the storytelling aspect, because I don't know what else I have to say about that, but I was thinking about just where we place, how we place value on the stories that we tell, whether that is monetary versus however you want to sort of explain it. But yeah, I'm curious, what kind of stories is it just like, because I don't watch TV.
You don't watch television.
Yeah. So with Jeep, is it just like we're proud to be a part of America's story, or is it
basically?
Okay.
And then they have the America 250 logo at the very end and be like, here's to the next 250. Now, I will say, and I'm not trying to call any brands out, but like Ram definitely leaned a little bit heavier into like showing images of like George Washington writing a document, and then like a bald eagle flying somewhere, and then a guy jumping off of a skyscraper with an American flag parachute. So it was definitely, what did Alex Edgar call it? American exceptionalism.
Oh, possibly.
It was giving American exceptionalism. Not saying that that's good or bad. Please don't get it twisted. But
Well, what I've appreciated is a lot of cultural institutions are leaning into those more local and not national levels, and especially with Smithsonian Folklife Festival, leaning into what are the states doing for their festivals. How are they selling? What stories are they rising to the occasion? And I think that's why some of these brands don't really know what to do, is because they think it should be this national story, but we've been pretty purposely making it more of a local level and celebrating what's going on
Yeah.
in communities.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
with Folklife Festival, what are you guys doing for America 250?
So, in 1976, for the bicentennial, we brought folks from across the United States to the mall for a festival that lasted 3 months. That's a
Wow.
long time. And this was before email and internet and Zoom. So I have no idea, how this happened. But again, as I talked about a little earlier, how we rely heavily on other colleagues and state arts councils and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's possible. But this year, we are, well, I should say there are three initiatives. So, they're of by and for the people. And I'm going to actually start with for the people and work my way backwards, because of the people is the festival. So for the people, exploring living traditions for learning is a professional development program that for teaching artists and middle school educators, and it's using and one of the things that it does is that it uses local festivals as experiential learning laboratories. So we're bringing teachers together with teaching artists to, sort of think about the work that they do and how we might begin to sort of make that work resonate and happen in classrooms. So again, local level. Who are the teaching artists in the community? You have the textbook that the state mandates, but there are people who are working in community who are making this history, who are sharing these ideas, are sharing these crafts. So sort of thinking locally about education and arts education in classrooms. So that's of by for the people. That's for the people. And we have by the people conversations beyond 250, and this is being produced in collaboration with the Federation of State Humanities Councils. And in essence, what we're doing is that we're sort of collaborating with state humanities councils, looking at the and collaborating on public programming, again, public programs that sort of focus and look at the humanities, culture, and tradition within communities. And then the third piece is the Festival of Festivals of the People, the Smithsonian Festival of Festivals. And we're collaborating with festivals across the US, and we're co-creating content. And this has been interesting because for 60 years, we've been bringing people to DC and they're down on the mall and they're sharing. And in 1976, that's what we did. We brought people. And in 2026, we're going out into community. And it's been interesting because it's quite a humbling experience in some respects. We we have a way that we do our festival, and each community, and actually I'm saying festivals, but I should say gatherings, because every gathering we're working with is not a festival. And I'll talk a little bit about what some of them are in a few minutes. But what's been beautiful about this process is how the communities that we've been working with, and the gatherings in the communities that we've been working with, how grateful and how yeah, I'm not grateful. I want to find a better adjective. I'm going to start with grateful. Maybe as we talk, something else will come up. But how grateful people are to have us in their communities, so we can see how how they gather, so we can see how what these things mean to the people in communities where they okay, maybe that's it. Again, we bring, in past years we brought people down to the mall, and some subset of the community might, maybe there's some people in a diaspora community who live in the DC metropolitan area, and they're able to come to the mall, but the people at home don't get to see all of that unfold. So by being out in these communities, we get to see how important that stuff is to the people,
Yeah,
to the
those story
community where they stay.
listeners.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly. Yes, that's what it is. We get to see how important that is to the people in the community where, those folks we would generally bring down to the mall. We get to see, sort of firsthand how important those traditions are to those community members. And that's a very different experience for us. We become listeners in a very different kind of way. And that, I think that's the humbling piece, is that, wow, I hadn't considered this. Again, we have a way that we do festival. And then, but the breadth of things that people are doing in these different communities, we are, some of the important, all of them are important, but some of the festivals and gatherings that we're are involved in. Next week, for example, there's a Juneteenth celebration here at the Anacostia Community
Mhm.
Museum, which is part of the Smithsonian museum system. So we're working with them. I was in March. I was in Saipan, in the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, which is the farthest territory from the mainland U.S. And we collaborated with them on what they were calling the Commonwealth Jubilee. Just so happens that the 250th coincided with the 50th anniversary of the signing of the covenant that created this relationship between the United States and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. And they wanted to mark that occasion with this festival, and we collaborated with them on that. And we spent like 7 or 8 days down in Saipan, and in 2 or 3 months, actually more than that, 3, 4 months, talking with them weekly about, how they might present this festival. And then you get there, and how, there was a pride that people felt with having the Smithsonian in Saipan, seeing the work that they do. And this is how we do festival. This is how we recognize and honor our tradition bearers. So we get to see, oh, okay, yeah, this is a very different experience than bringing people out of community. And you get to see again how the pride and the resolve that people have in those communities and their relationship to these traditions um, uh, that are, being displayed and being shared. So that going out has been a very different experience for us, but also a really important experience for us as people who are curators, as people who are researchers, but probably more important, as people who are just human. So you get
Hmm.
again, to be in that reciprocity of the story, and being able to see that story unfold in the place where it comes from is a really different and very powerful experience.
Yes, I was gonna say, I'm sure a huge part of it is that place based, and
Exactly. Yes.
how much a lot of the culture is based on location. Just a really obvious one. I remember when we were at this was, I guess, a decade ago, Folklife Festival, but it's a lot different when you're from a less hot environment, and then you end up doing your a traditional dance in DC in the middle of July, and there's some differences there, and so seeing these gatherings in their the
In
location that
situ. Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's pretty incredible. um what are you I I know this is, you're not done with the year yet and going to all these festivals, but has there anything that you have already picked up on that you're going to bring back to the Folklife Festival for next year or future years?
Oh, uh, well, I will say that. So the festival happens on the mall, and years ago, there are videos of like rodeos down the center of the mall and rice paddies. None of that stuff is going to happen again.
Oh, wow. Rodeos and rice.
Patties.
Just because
Whoa.
the park service is well, no, we need to protect this. So there'd be things I must confess there are things that I would love to bring back but probably can't. But I think that for me it's not so much. um I think it is maybe the how of the story, how the story
Mm.
is told. um we've been doing this for 60 years, so we have a lot of experience with it. And I would say there's a formula there. There's things that we do that are that work really well. So I'm not even, so sometimes formulas are great, and some, that's okay. But I do think that there is I think that there's sort of the possibility of even creating more opportunities for um, um, even more voices to become part of the of how the festival unfolds. Um, I would say I think the thing that I might want, and it's sort of interesting when I say that, sort of creating, opportunities for other voices. I would actually like us to be able to I don't want this to be a one-off. I would actually like the idea of going out and collaborating with festivals,
Mm.
as sort of as part of kind of a regular um, part of the festival. Certainly, bringing folks to DC is great, and important. Particularly down on that mall, because there's local people, and there's like at that time of year there's like kids from Missouri or Idaho or other places down there on like summer trips or school trips, and there's international visitors down on the mall. So there's this incredible range of people that you come into contact with. But the thing I think I would like is to be able to every few years that we go out and we sojourn with the people in their community, because again it becomes a different learning experience for us too. And I think that the humility of that is important. You think about the mall and the Capitol and the monument are there, and the stately halls of the Congress and all of those sorts of things, and the beauty of the museums. And that's important, but it's equally as important and powerful to be in the little Ramada on the in a parking lot sometimes, because again
Right.
there's a different story that's told there than the story that's told on the mall. And to be able to have the opportunity to hear that story in its place of origin, and to see that story and how people react to that story, the people who know that story, how they react to that story is really important. So I think the thing that I would like to see is us going out and being in community um, in the future. I don't want this to be a one-off. I'd like to think about us continuing to do some level of that work.
Yeah, I love that. Um, kind of related to this, I I went to a workshop that you did for Democracy and Dialogue, and you talked about storytelling as a method of civic action. And so I guess, what is your hope when you're going into a festival that the stories that are being told, what is your hope for them, like the impact of them, the impact of the either the festival, or what what kind of civic action are your goals when you're thinking about this?
Hmm. I think that it's important that I think that gathering is important. I'm an introvert, so
Hmm.
it's sort of interesting to hear myself say this. But I do think that those gatherings are key in the sense that they create opportunities, again, sort of people to tell their stories. But they also create opportunities for people to get, to, I think, sort of develop a stronger sense of um, what this community looks like, and who lives in my community, and who are the people. What is that? Was that Sesame Street? Who are the people in your neighborhood? Yeah,
Hmm.
that's what those gatherings do. You get to see, and you
Yeah.
get to sojourn with them, and you get to hear, what it is that you get to hear, who they are. So, and that's the sort of thing that can lead to um, that civic action. Those are the sorts of things where, if I know, this is, I never go to the waterfront. So if I go to the waterfront for this festival and I was like, oh, okay, I've never been down here. I didn't realize this place was so important to people.
Mm.
And not only that, I think we need to do some work in making sure that there's green spaces for kids. So you're hoping that these gatherings will bring people together in a way where they're talking to each other, and sort of sojourning with each other and learning from each other, and and creating a community, creating a space and community where they're recognizing, the resources that community have or don't have. And, so again, thinking about how, when we come together in these spaces, what it means to be in these physical spaces, and the placemaking that happens in these spaces, and how my presence impacts that. Could be positive or negatively. But again, I think that as we're thinking about this, um, just being clear um, that these, these are the communities that, that are in these different cities, people who don't cross bridges, or, when I was growing up here in DC, you didn't want to cross the bridge, or you didn't want to go across the train tracks and that sort of thing. So, thinking about how, um, the creation that happens in those communities, and how, um, um, that, sort of those things lead to action. I'm starting to unravel and ramble here, so I'm gonna leave it there.
No, you're fine. I think the idea that like storytelling, you learn to give you learn and you give yourself a voice, and then by being that story listener, by listening to all of these stories, you're learning to advocate. Yeah, one, you're learning to advocate for each other. You're talking about these people, what they need is a green space, and now you're knowing. Yeah, and so you can learn to advocate for others by listening to their stories, which I think is very powerful. Um, I do want to pull on that neighborhood thread, but for that, I think we're going to go over to the Joy Corner.
The natural curiosity of youth.
Are you ready? We're gonna ask you something.
A little bit out there, but it'll be good.
You're scaring me, Easton. Go ahead.
Sorry. It's great. So no, I want to talk about. So there's a lot of people who are around their neighbors, and like we live around our neighbors. Some of us know our neighbors, some of us don't. Depending on whether you're in a home or an apartment, all that stuff. But like a lot of folks don't really feel like they're in a part of a community. Like they don't feel like they're part of a community per se, just because they're around people that they may or may not know. So, so what's one thing that you think would alleviate much of the disconnectedness as it applies to neighborhoods? So this could be policy, infrastructure. Just what do you think? What do you think can bridge that gap between I live next to these people, so we're kind of neighbors, to I'm in a community with the people around me?
And if you need time to think, we can make Easton go first.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, Easton, you go first.
Well, it's actually interesting because I have these two very recent experiences. So I took a trip to St. Louis for the very first time in my life. And I also just had a brief instance where I was doing some light apartment hunting. And I will say, I, first of all, had absolutely no interest in going to St. Louis because I was like, what's even out there? Like, I knew about the Arch and the barbecue and the gooey butter cake, but I didn't know about like their racial demographics or anything like that. But when I went there, I was very, very pleasantly surprised, not only with the diversity, but like with the amount of green space that they have. They all have these easily accessible parks, one of which, I think it's Forest Park, is bigger than Central Park, which I had absolutely no idea that even existed. And everything, like a great amount of, like every single museum we went to was free, like entirely free of charge. And like I know that the taxpayers in that city, they arranged for that to be the case. So I'm sure somebody somewhere is paying. But like at that point, like I mean, their museums are free. A lot of their museums are free, and their zoo is also free. So you have all these, we went to the zoo and it's like, yeah, it's absolutely free admission. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, could you imagine if more American cities went to adopted this model? Because if you go around St. Louis, everyone has a zoo story because they've all been to the zoo. It's easily accessible. Everyone has a park story because, well, we love going to parks, especially when you're in a city, you need that escape. And so I just thought that it was so cool that they have that, what we call the third place or the third space. Whereas, okay, if work and school is your first place and your home is your second place, where's that third place where you can go and be in community with people without the obligation of membership and the obligation of having to spend money? Because that's the main reason why a lot of our third places, at least in a lot of other American cities, are going away, is because, well, it's usually a place like a brewery or something where you have to spend money. And in the apartment hunting scene, how that relates is that there was an apartment that I'm not going to name because I did not go with them, but they had you had to pay a community fee to live there. Oh. You had to pay a fee to be in community with the people around you. Like, well, if you have access to the clubhouse and access to the pool and you're going to pay us an extra fee. And so it's very interesting, the kind of dichotomy between like encouraging unity versus charging for it. And yeah, so I will say, just to answer the question after all that talking, is we need more third spaces and I just think there are things that need to be free. I mean, like, yeah, parks are technically free, but like, I just think there's little ways where you can make it so people in a community have shared experiences that they can kind of bridge that gap with. So we all need a little bit more St. Louis in us, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I read something recently that that third spaces are disappearing from that. Could you repeat the question?
Sure. So there are many people in this world who live around their neighbors, and they may know a few of them, but they don't feel like they're part of a community. So what's one thing you think could alleviate much of that disconnectedness if it's applied to neighborhoods or apartment complexes or what have you?
So I live in a neighborhood in DC, and there is it's called Mount Pleasant, and they have this village association. And they had this campaign, this Hello Neighbor campaign, and they like printed all these signs. I'm looking one that's on my fence still. It's a big old vinyl sign, like it's sort of one of the more, famous corners in the neighborhood, and it's like different people and getting off of buses, and it's like hola and salam, and it's like saying hello in all these different languages. And they do, there's a park, and they organize events in the park, and they have these smaller get-togethers with different, I forget the term that they were using, where people get together and have lunch together. There was like a Tuesday. I'm living in the house of a colleague who passed away last year, and she had her Tuesday breakfast club that she went to. But again, it was, but not unlike what you're talking about, Easton. Sort of very being deliberately, and it has to be deliberate. I don't think you can expect this. I mean, I think it does happen naturally in some respects, but I think that, the way neighborhoods have changed and shifted, and communities have changed and shifted. When I was growing up, I never thought I would ever leave my neighborhood because nobody ever left the neighborhood. Now, at this point, I've lived across the city, I've lived in other states, I've lived in other cities. We move, and we move in ways that we didn't used to. So I think that it has to be a much more deliberate, a much more intentional work has to be done to sort of create some of those third spaces, to create opportunities to sojourn, and recognizing that people gravitate towards them differently. That I may not go to the Tuesday Breakfast Club because that's way too much pressure on an introvert to have to be able to engage in conversation for too long.
Yeah.
But but I might be more inclined to go on a community walk where we're just all walking together, and I'm going to go birding at some point soon too, just because of my experience in Conner Prairie.
Oh,
But
wow.
the um, sort of being very intentional about creating these opportunities for people to come together, because again, we're not with the neighborhoods of old where I knew all my neighbors. Those places don't exist in the same way that they used to. So it's that there's much more intentional work that has to go into creating these opportunities to be in conversation, or to be in the presence of other people.
That was a perfect answer.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ryan.
I struggle with this one. So
I picked
well, and it's because I struggle with finding a community here since I moved to Indiana. When I was in DC, I felt a strong community. A bit of it was forced because I had my grad school friends, and then also there was I interned at Air and Space, and there was an intern crop of us that kind of just stuck around, and so we had a bit of a formed community out of those two spaces, and moved here. Indiana's my home state, so there were people that I knew when I came back, but I never really felt that same sense of community, which is interesting too, because the part of Indiana that I'm from is Carmel. It's very walkable. There's free tennis or free ping pong on this Monon walking trail. Like there's a lot of opportunity for community, but being an introvert too, I feel like I need to be kind of forced into situations. And so I will say personally, I guess the thing that I would change is like every neighborhood needs some sort of, I don't want to say museum, but because I'm a little obsessed about museums, but some sort of cultural center space that does give the opportunity to tell stories of the place. Just because for me, I love going to museums because it allows me to interact with people, but I have something that, like, if I don't know what to talk about, I can at least point to the thing on the wall and be like, hey, let's talk about that thing. And so for me, it's been really interesting because I've made kind of a goal to go to all of the county museums in Indiana, and each one of them does feel like a little, community area. And I've gotten connected with the one that is within walking distance of my house. And so, but yeah, it's something that I know I still struggle with, and it may have also been because I graduated in 2020, and a lot of those like community activities have moved online. Right. But yeah, I agree with you. We need to bring back third spaces, and we need to bring back activities in third spaces. Yes. Yeah, and I guess that goes into intentionality, is intentionally using those third spaces for community events.
Mm-hmm. That was a beautiful answer. That was great. And we're a room full of introverts trying to make it happen. Well, then I'll just lob in the second question. What's something that you enjoy that you feel is underrated? Like you love it and everybody else just doesn't get it.
So this is kind of simple.
Mm-hmm.
I am a committed non-driver. I don't have a driver's license.
Mm-hmm.
So I walk everywhere. And this is a car culture, and well, Indiana was very much a car
Yeah.
culture.
Mm.
And I get it. I live in a city. There's public transportation. It's not the best public transportation in the world, but I can get from point A to point B.
Get there.
So, but I sometimes I go places and I'm just reminded of how people don't walk and don't walk around. And I'm happy just walking.
Mhm.
And just being out and listening to the birds and watching the sights on, Columbia Road or wherever I'm walking at any given moment. I don't need a lot. So that's kind of a boring answer, but yeah, I think I love people watching.
Mhm.
So I love to watch how the city. I mean, it makes me sad. I would say that I would love to watch the city kind of. I won't say that. I'll say I would love to watch the city unfold. I don't
Mm.
know that I love to watch. I know that I don't love the city to watch the city change so dramatically
Mm.
or like yeah the way that it has. But I do love to watch the city unfold. It's like on my walk in the morning, the stores as they open and the people who are always on this particular corner and saying good morning and that sort of thing. So I think that I don't have to be taught, I don't have to be in conversation with people. I don't have to be with another person. I love that I don't want to call it a stillness, but I think there's sort of an internal stillness that comes when I'm walking and well, yeah, when I walk in the mornings and sort of watch the city wake up. I think that's what I'm trying to say. I love watching the city wake up. Um, and in the evenings, I love the places where I go where it's like a lot of birds gravitate to this place, and there's just like this cacophony, all these different birds, and then there's that last little squawk, and then there's so yeah, I think I love that stillness of being and of sort of watching the world unfold around me. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Well, hey, as someone who doesn't love driving, who also loves people watching, you are speaking my language. Absolutely. We need to walk more.
Yeah, I was gonna say I wish we could get away with not driving.
Yeah,
That
it'd be
is
hard over
that
yeah,
is one thing I
that
miss about
yeah.
DC.
Just being able to walk, yeah.
Yeah, I still don't know my answer to this. You wanna?
Okay, I'll go next. Well, this is definitely different. I wish I had a better answer, but I'm gonna go with a food item. I think oatmeal is an underrated food because I love oatmeal. I've eaten. It's one food that I've eaten since I was little and still eat to this day. My dad used to make it from scratch, and now of course I just eat the Quaker packet version, but I eat it almost every day. It's filling. They got different flavors. You can mix the flavors if you want. I do 2 packs in one. It's all you need. It's milk based. I'm a big milk guy. I don't know exactly, I know the big thing is protein now. Everything has a protein variant. They do have protein variants. I don't like them, but they do have them. So I don't know about different grams and stuff or calorie intake or all that dietary other things. It is a lovely food. It's got melatonin in it. Put you right to sleep. I just think that it is a very, and every time I talk about oatmeal, they're like, "Oh, Grandpa needs to put his teeth in the cup." It's like, listen, leave me alone. I have found a food that I love. I don't care if it's an old person food. I think it is a great food.
I like oatmeal. It's very filling. I usually have it without milk and put just water in it.
Well, that's
But,
fine too.
yeah.
I don't discriminate. Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Okay.
So there you go.
I think I have an answer to this.
Okay.
I was gonna say road tripping, but maybe not anymore. All of these anti-car. I really like to plan, and I guess I'll be more specific. I like to plan itineraries, and it's not about controlling an experience. It's more of I have this massive fear of missing out on something, And so I want to make sure that I have every possibility kind of written out. And I'm fine if we don't do everything that's on the itinerary. And I love spontaneity and I love doing things, but I always hate like, oh, I was in, maybe I was in St. Louis last weekend and I just completely missed out on something because I didn't, look it up ahead of time. And so I just very much enjoy creating itineraries. I don't know why. I have just pages and pages of itineraries on my laptop open right now for hypothetical future trips of things I want to do.
Oh, so you itineraried. Is that what that is right here?
Oh no! Oh well, it's part of it.
You've written itineraries for trips you haven't taken yet.
Yeah,
wow.
They're completely hypothetical ones. But I've eventually gone on a lot of these. Mm-hmm. So yeah,
you're a planner. That's yeah.
And I think it's fun because then I'm virtually exploring the place before I go.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's exciting. I get that.
That's pretty cool.
I used to do. I taught for a number of years, high school and undergraduate, and in both instances, both cases, I ended up teaching in the field a lot and traveling with students, and I loved it. It was just so exciting to see the possibilities of things. And again, sometimes we got to them, sometimes we didn't, but what the possibilities were was really exciting. So I get that.
Well, we're almost done. I have two questions. Well, I'm not sure how to make this first one a question. Way at the very beginning of this conversation, you talked about futurism and using storytelling to kind of imagine possible futures. And I think that's a really important concept for this whole conversation that we've had, that you can imagine, possible futures with storytelling. Personally, I'm just fascinated by this idea of futurism storytelling, and I know I'm not very good at it. And so I love listening to people who are and can, pull these very welcome futures for me just out of kind of, for me, thin air, because I don't know how they do it. And so I know you've mentioned futurism in a couple of our workshops. So I'm just curious, do you see futurism having a role in this moment as we're thinking about, our past, our future of the country?
Yeah. Okay. I taught a lot of history, and I do think that, I know that. I don't say I think that. I don't know many things, but I do know that having some sort of grounding, having some foundation in history is important to that reimagining. And I say that in part because I think I've used parameters in the archive a couple of times too in this conversation. I probably use them in other conversations too, is that I don't think that people recognize what's possible. So you're born, each of us is born into a particular historical moment. And when you're born in that moment, this is all you see. This is all you know. So you just kind of go with it. And it's like, okay, this is how we cook rice. This is how we educate people. This is how we do X, Y, and Z. Because you're within this particular moment in history. And you look back to look forward. Because if you look back, you realize that, this is not how things always were. There are other possibilities. There are other models. There's other ways of being. And so I don't know if it's, I think for me, it's not an imagining, but a reimagining of what was. And but you have to know the history to be able to even to reimagine, because again, that knowing of those other ways of being and living and sort of those other ways of being in the world, we have to be able to see them to be able to sort of apply some of that to the present and to the future. I'm very much an advocate of ancestral knowledge traditions. I'm very much an advocate of sort of thinking about um, other ways of being and existing and co-creating worlds and that sort of thing. So and I've come by this what's that term? What's the way people say? I've come by this honestly, and I've come by this with pretty profound experiences. When I was, when you're a kid growing up, when like the aunties and then why are they talking about this? I don't want to, this is that old fashioned stuff, and then you're like, okay, they were on to something. What was wrong with me
The
at
aunties were
15?
right. The
The
aunties were
aunties
right.
were right. Yes, they were. So they were on to something. So there is this part of me that is trying to take some of that, go, sort of like recognizing that stuff and wanting to apply it to, my present and also my future for for the next generation. And being very deliberate about creating opportunities for other people to be able to see and sort of hear some of those stories and some of those things that make sense. So I think that you talked about past, present, and future. We have to, but it's not one or the other. We have to look to the past to sort of think about our present, and we have to look at the past and the present to sort of think about our future. Because I think that it's important to recognize that there are other models and there are other ways of being in the world that I don't necessarily see, or you don't necessarily, because again, each of us was born in a very particular, born and are growing and changing in a very particular moment in history. So looking back to be able to look forward, again, that's that, what's that idea of the Sankofa, looking back to look forward. That's sort of that's that ancestral thinking.
Yeah.
And, recognizing that, those folks were onto something.
Yeah, and I think it's powerful recognizing, because in history we're taught it very linearly, but recognizing that not everything in history were the foregone conclusions we think of them being today. Even the American Revolution, we talk about it as if it was a foregone conclusion that America would become this country in 1776. But in 1776, very much that was not a foregone conclusion, and so yeah, I think that's a very important thing to capture.
Agreed. And the other old adage is that, history is always written by the victors. But now I think with America 250 and the new way we're trying to like bring every single voice to this table is now like history's written by everyone.
Yeah, democratization
Yeah.
of history.
Yeah,
Yeah.
democratization is really important.
Oh, well, then we'll ask you our penultimate question, Miss Banks, and you've just been spectacular, and we appreciate you taking this time with us.
What is your hope for the future?
I would like to see, there's a lot of words that we use to sort of talk about people and their well-being. And I would like to see, this is okay, so poetic and literary references, just that's part of my identity. Tony K. Bambara was a novelist who passed away some years ago, and in the 1980s, early 90s, she wrote this book called The Salt Eaters, and like one of the opening lines where she talks about I'm probably not quoting it you'll get the gist of it. I don't know that I'm quoting it exactly the way it was said, where she talks about this woman goes back down to South Carolina and goes through stuff to sort of like get her life together. But anyway, the one of the first few lines on the first page is something about, sister, do you want to be well? And that's one of those lines that has stayed with me and will always stay with me. I want people to be well. And I don't want people to do well because doing well means here having a big car or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. I want people to be well. And I want to live in a place where people are well and they're doing well and they are well. And that means, being, physically well, but also well here and, within their, in their hearts and in their, sort of that alignment between heart and head. I want people to be well. I don't want people to be resilient because resilient could suggest that we're always fighting against something. I want people to be well. And that's simple, but so profoundly complicated.
Yeah, no.
But that's what I want. I want people to be well.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I too want to thank you so much for joining us. And I want to wish you the best on all of your travels, going out to all of these festivals. Very exciting, and probably very busy summer coming up ahead.
Busy summer.
Yeah. I do want to shout out a couple of things. Obviously, shout out Folklife Festival. Is there anything else you want to shout out?
Just that I had a great time at Conner Prairie. So you shout out festival. I'll shout out if you get an opportunity, visit Conner Prairie. I had a wonderful time, and I'll probably end up falling in a hole because I'm always looking up because I was there for Black Birders Week, and now every bird that sings, I'm looking to try to find it. So not watching my steps. So, but worth every moment of it. So yeah, shouting out, you can shout out, Conner Prairie shouts out the festival, the Folklife Festival shouts out Conner Prairie.
Awesome. If you do want to join us for a bird walk, it's every Thursday. We have guided bird walks with our specialist, Michelle.
Do it.
Yeah, and then if you are interested in, getting involved in telling your story or the act of creation for America 250, Hamilton County is doing an oral history project. There's all of our cultural institutions of Hamilton County have gotten together, and we're all doing oral history projects. And it doesn't mean you have to be an elder. Truly, anyone can go and tell their story of how they their life, how they are interacting with the America 250, really anything, and that's all throughout the county. A couple of things here at Conner Prairie. If you are interested in, displaying your wish to the future of the country, we have our wish wall. It is up and active right outside of our office.
Very, very active.
It gets filled up very quickly. So even if you don't know what your wish is, you can come and read what some other people's wishes are. And it's a really cool interactive. And then the other thing is Made by Us is doing a letter to America. So if you want to speak, to your either speak to the country in general or speak to what you think the future of the country should be, you can write your own letter to America and submit it to History Made by Us. But yeah, there's so many opportunities to get your voice out there, to listen and to tell. So
tell your stories, take advantage of it.
Tell your stories.
Well, listen, everyone listening and watching, thank y'all so much for spending some time with us. We're going to hit the outro here real quick. Be sure to check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere where podcasts live, we will also be there. And until next time, y'all take care.
bye.